So people are starting to think that Marvel Rivals is going to add loot boxes to the game. Let's talk about it. YouTube, what's going on, man? It's Father Dark. I'm here on a beautiful Monday afternoon. Hope everybody's having a great week. If you're not, sorry to hear that. But let's go ahead and get into the video. So a lot of people this week and last week, I'm a few days late on it just because I had to cover some other things for the beginning of season 4. Hope everybody's been enjoying season 4 so far. If you haven't, let me know in the comments what you're not liking about it. Maybe I'll make it a future video. But nonetheless, though, like I was saying in the beginning of the video, a lot of people have been making articles and stuff like that, little videos saying that they think that NetEase is going to start adding loot boxes to the game. Now, there's a lot of people that feel differently about loot boxes. I've seen some people that are from like the Overwatch community that are like, oh man, I wish they get rid of like these mini battle passes and battle passes in general and stuff like that and just go back to loot boxes. I see some people that are, the complete opposite, and they have a completely different mindset when it comes to loot boxes. They think more, in regards to games like, Genshin Impact and all these other different games and stuff like that, where you can't really like directly just like buy things that you want. You have to sit here and keep doing loot boxes over and over again to be able to get stuff in the game. And there's plenty of other ones that I could go on and on about in regards to that. But overall, though, like I said, people are pretty like divided on how they feel about loot boxes. But I just kind of want to talk about where that's all coming from and, the actual laws and stuff when it comes to China and NetEase's thoughts and stuff on it versus just kind of my personal feelings, which I will get into at the end of the video. But I always think it's best with stuff like this to just actually, talk about the facts and be logical here. So why do people think that they might be adding loot boxes in the future? Well, first, data miners, and this is notably from Rivals Info on Twitter and a couple of other different places, but that's the main one that I pulled from initially, and it was from the article from PC Gamer. But they had referenced in season 4 from Marvel Rivals to something called mysteries. Those seem like mystery boxes or loot box assets. Examples are strings like cosmic mystery numbers and box open history change, which is like the string for the code. And these data mine assets, they pretty much suggest that there's a logic component for loot or mystery box behavior in there. But most importantly, they're not in a live state yet, meaning that they're not actually ready to go. It's just like there's stuff back there in the code, which now this isn't uncommon when people develop games. I was watching a video the other day where they had showed how when GTA 5, back when they were in development for it, they basically had all these little like attachments to just pretty much all this different stuff around the map, right? And basically that was where people were supposed to be able to climb up pretty much any little thing that they wanted to. Whereas like as games go on, they start to realize like, oh, well, hey, maybe we're not going to have as much time as we thought to add this stuff in. So instead of taking every little piece of code out of there for all this particular stuff, they just leave it in there. When people go, data mining through, they'll find this stuff and they don't know if it's something that's actually going to get added into the game or if it's stuff that's left over or whatever. But for clicks and views, a lot of times I'll go, is this thing going to be added? Well, we're not necessarily lying because we found it in the code. And the thing is, it's not even a situation where they're doing it intentionally. Like they may not honestly know. They're just doing what they do, which is data mining, meaning going through files and looking for things that could be of interest, right? So obviously when people hear about this stuff, the first thing they're going to think of is what a lot of times with loot boxes is that they may end up costing physical money, real money. And with loot boxes, the thing is that the whole point of loot boxes is that you're not supposed to be guaranteed to get something. It's supposed to be a random thing. So you could sit here and buy 20, 30 loot boxes and never get the actual thing that you originally wanted. It's a lot different from the current system we have where they release a skin or emotes or sprays or whatever in the store. You get a certain amount of currency, just like anything else in life, and you give them that, they give you exactly what it is that you want. Whereas the opposite of that is basically us sitting here, like I said, buying 20, 30, maybe 100, 200 boxes or something and not even getting what it is that you want, which there are other games that do that, but currently Marvel Rivals doesn't, right? So this is what makes it less certain that it would actually happen. So back in December 2024, NetEase actually denied that loot boxes were in the future. They said those assets were leftover/relics of earlier development stages and that loot boxes would not be added. Since the file references are in the data, but there's no confirmation of launch or plans to monetize them in that way yet, it could just be something that's under consideration or even scrapped. Like I said before, data miners, they're often, picking up on things that are leftover parts of a game. Not every single little thing that at one point was being thought about actually gets taken out of the game all the time. A lot of times they just move on or leave it behind, but the files actually stay there in the game. Another thing that I want to add into that I don't think that a lot of people actually know is that China actually has some really strict laws and regulations when it comes to loot boxes. Now, the fact that they have these laws would lead me to believe that there have been numerous upon numerous games where they've made loot boxes and stuff like that, and people have become just outright addicted to them, because technically it's kind of like gambling, and gambling is a very addictive thing for people. Me personally, I've never really had an issue with gambling, and I tend to stay away from games where I can't just get what it is that I want. There were some games that I played in the past that kind of started to have those models where they'd say, hey, you're going to get picks or draws or whatever, and you may get this thing you want or you may not get it. And I'm like, why would I do that when I could just go play a game like this or COD or Fortnite or anything else, where if I want something, I just simply pay the 10, 15, 20 bucks that it costs or whatever, and I get it the first time around. Why would I sit here and subject myself to gambling when I just don't have to? That to me has always been silly, but there's a lot of people that can't help themselves, or maybe they just enjoy the game so much that they put up with it. Nonetheless, though, with China, they have mandatory odds disclosure, which is a 2017 law. Game publishers must publicly disclose the exact probability of getting each type of item from loot boxes or gotcha mechanics. This information must be posted on the game's official website or inside the game. There can be no real money resale. Virtual items from loot boxes cannot be resold or traded for real money to prevent gambling style markets. I feel like that was kind of a shot at like CSGO. Now, I don't play CSGO, but I'm pretty sure that's how that works. And if I'm wrong, you guys can correct me in the comments. I'm very certain that they pretty much do that. You basically have to keep drawing randomly to get items in the game. You get that item and then you're able to trade that item with other people. So there's actually like a real world market and resale value, which is one of the main reasons why CSGO is as popular as it is. And like I said, if I'm wrong about that, let me know in the comments, but that's always been my understanding about it, which is why certain things are so rare and why people are actually able to physically make money off of rare items. There's limits on loot box purchases. So there's daily/weekly purchase limits that apply in many cases, especially for under 18. So that's wild. They're letting people under 18 actually buy stuff. And I know a lot of people are like, well, how would they know? Things are a lot different over there than they are over here. I'm pretty sure, and you guys can correct me once again if I'm wrong, but people have to actually log in with it. Like people get a code, and that code is only for you. So for me, for example, my code might be 3785, right? And that means that I'm dark, that they know exactly how old I am. If I was under 18, they would know that. If I was over 18, they would know that. And they'd also know every single thing else about me. Now, there's ways around it. Like I've heard of people taking their parents' code or something like that and using that one. But for the most part, though, everybody has their own code. So you at least have that going for you. They also have alternative acquisition methods, meaning games must offer a way to obtain the same items without relying solely on loot boxes, for example, via gameplay, progression, crafting, or direct purchases. And last but not least, we have transparency to regulators. Companies have to provide regulators with details reporting of loot box mechanics and odds. Now we have the practical impacts, right? And that means that games in China often show drop rate percentages and clear menus before you open a loot box. Some companies like Tencent and NetEase add pity systems, guaranteed rare drops after a set number of tries to comply and reduce backlash. And these restrictions have influenced global releases, since publishers often just keep the odds disclosure and pity mechanics in all regions. So basically, if they're making these games in China, they're not going to sit here and just have these things apply only to their Chinese customers. They're going to apply them worldwide. So it would be the same thing with NetEase and Marvel Rivals, we would think. So if Marvel Rivals was to introduce loot boxes, they would definitely have to comply with these laws. Now, I don't know if there's some way around that for them or whatever the case is, but like I said, these are the laws for them. So to me, that would seem like this is something that they took the time to introduce because it probably was such a big problem. So the likelihood of them actually putting them in here for anything other than just like cosmetics or something, or not giving us some other way to obtain it. But then like I said, even with that, I feel like the wording is kind of sketch, because to me, it's like this, right? It's like, well, you could buy this loot box for $1, right? And then maybe so many for $10 or whatever the case is, right? Or you could just maybe outright buy this special collector bundle or something for $100 or something like that. To me, that kind of seems like that's where they could go with it. And that would kind of encourage people to want to buy the loot boxes. Plus, sometimes, a lot of times, it's entertaining for people. I've seen content creators where that's what they'll do. They'll sit back and they'll say, like, how many draws do I have to do to get this particular thing, or whatever the case is. And I've just, like I said, I've never really been into that kind of stuff. I don't encourage it. It's not something that I would want to ever do on my channel, or something that I would ever want to do for entertainment, for myself, or for content creation or anything like that. But everybody's different, though. Everybody's got their own shtick. I feel the way I feel about stuff, but I don't necessarily say that other people can't do what they want to do, or whatever the case is. People are always going to migrate toward what they're going to migrate toward. And one thing that I did want to add in for people that were curious like myself, because I did look it up, because to my understanding, Genshin Impact, which is a game that my sister really, really loves, and she plays it all the time. And when she first really got into it, she was like, "Oh, you should play this game with me," yada, yada, yada. And because it's my younger sister, I was like, whatever, I downloaded it. And that was really one of the first like forays for me into kind of like a gacha system and stuff. And to me, I was wondering, like, does that not apply to kind of the same thing with like the loot boxes and stuff? And apparently, from looking it up, it's the same thing where they have to disclose the odds. They have to tell you how many you can do before you're going to basically be able to get a 3, 4, 5-star character and all of that kind of stuff. They also use the pity system, meaning you're guaranteed a 5-star within 90 pulls and a 4-star within 10 pulls, et cetera, et cetera. They got the safety net and all that kind of stuff. The same thing with the alternative acquisition method, the purchase limit for miners, and they report to regulators and stuff. So they basically check all the boxes off. But at the same time, though, it's the same thing where I've seen people spend just a ridiculous amount of money on that game trying to get a particular thing. Like I said, the 3 or 4 or 5-star characters and getting the full sets and all of that kind of stuff. And I personally just think that's kind of ridiculous that people do that, but I get it though. You get into a game, you really like it, and you're kind of blinded by the way that it works, and you're just kind of like, oh, well, this is just the way they do things. And it was funny because I even kind of told my sister at one point, I said, this is just kind of predatory, in my opinion, how they're kind of doing a lot of this stuff. I was like, you do realize there's other games where if you wanted something, you could just spend the money and just get it. You wouldn't have to sit here and do these pulls and all that kind of stuff. And, she didn't care at the time. And I think she still doesn't care. She still plays Genshin Impact to this day. And, that, like I said, to each their own. Everybody's got their own thing. There's a lot of people who look at people buying cosmetics in the game, period, even if they're $5, and they go, why would you spend money on something that's a digital item for a game that you might not even play next year? And people are entitled and allowed to feel the way they feel about stuff like that. Like I said, it's just me personally. I don't approve of that style of gaming. I don't like loot boxes. I would much rather, if you're going to do stuff like that, put certain cosmetics in the game, kind of like how Rivals does it now, where they offer certain skins and stuff that are in the game, but they're just these challenges that you have to do. Or you can unlock them through just like the gameplay or whatever the case is, or you earn a certain currency while you're playing the game, and you can choose to unlock, whatever the cosmetic is that you choose to at your time. And then, because there's a lot of times where there's stuff that I just don't care about, kind of like those little keychains that they introduce. They haven't made a single one that I honestly really care about. I mean, they have some for characters that I use, obviously, like, for example, Emma Frost. But do I care about Jeff or having a keychain for Jeff? No. I really wish that I could just get whatever little keychain I wanted and put it on whatever character, but they'll probably get to that in the future. This is just the beginning. And, back to the original point of the loot boxes and stuff like that. My personal thoughts on it are this. When game companies say we're not going to do this particular thing, it's really hard for me to trust them, because people will sit back and they'll say, well, the devs this and the devs that. The devs have to answer to someone. And at the end of the day, it just depends on how shady the CEO and the corporate people are in the boardrooms when they decide these things. Because at the end of the day, the devs don't actually really decide anything outside of little changes here and there and stuff like that to gameplay. But when it comes down to anything that is going to have to do with money and stuff like that, those types of decisions get made in executive boardrooms and stuff, where these people are people that more than likely have never touched a video game in their life. They are just there to see how much money this game can make them, and how much return on investment that they can get. And they don't care about all of the politics of loot boxes and how the player base feels and all of that kind of stuff, especially when you have a company like NetEase, where there are more than enough games that you can go back and look at where NetEase has, just driven them into the ground, and they've said they weren't going to do certain stuff, and they went back and did all this other stuff. And they're not the only ones. It's not just a NetEase thing. This is tons of games. There have been plenty of games where they said, oh, we're not going to do this. Oh, this isn't going to happen. You look at COD, like they'll always release a new game and they'll say, we're going back to being, we're going to go to the Milsim style, and we're getting rid of the silly skins and all that kind of stuff. And then literally 4 or 5 months into the game, you're playing as giant bunny rabbits and Family Guy and all this other crazy stuff. Not that I personally have an issue with it, but there are people who get really amped up and excited and go, oh man, we're not going to have any of those Fortnite skins in here. And then a few months later they do. And they just kind of ignore it and don't bring it back up again because they don't have to, and people are going to keep playing the game. Yeah, there might be a few people that complain on Twitter, but at the end of the day, no one cares. And I feel like it could be the same thing with NetEase. Now, do I think that they're going to add this stuff in? No, but at the same time, though, it doesn't detract from the fact that they possibly could, and there would be nothing to really stop them if they wanted to go down that route. I mean, they did make this game as like a clone to pretty much Overwatch, and that's what Overwatch did. And did I feel like Overwatch was doing it in a negative way? No, they had like free cosmetics in the game and stuff like that, and free things that were supposed to come in the game, and that was just something that when you got done playing the game, you got them. Apex did the same thing for a long time. They had the little, whatever they were called, but they were like these little robot looking things that were loot boxes, and after every match you would win so many little currency points or whatever, and you could use those to buy those, or you could manually buy them, and that's how you would unlock certain cosmetics for the game and stuff like that outside of the ones that they sold in the shop. So this wouldn't be some new crazy thing or something like that. And like I said, that's just my opinion on it, but I am curious to know what you all think about it. Like I said, I like to go with the facts first and then kind of form my opinion from there. But at the same time, people can sit back and say, it's going to be rainbows and cupcakes all day long. And I'm just kind of like, I'll wait to see, I'll wait a couple months down the road to see what's actually going to happen. So like I said, I'm curious to know what you think about it. Do you care? Do you not care? Would you welcome loot boxes? Would you rather have that over battle passes and the little mini passes and stuff like that we have? Would it bother you if they cost real money, etc., as long as they apply by the, their laws and stuff that they have, the ones that I listed earlier with the, pick rates and drop rates and limits and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I am interested to know. Let me know down in the comments. I do appreciate you all for listening. That's all I got for this video, so I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up. I'm Father Dark, and I'll catch you on the next one.